Okay, well, today we are talking about binding the strong man, chapter 4 of Say It to the Mountain. And here's the first question. Just a little pretest. Have you ever heard the phrase binding the strong man before?
I've heard it, and I don't remember what it means.
Okay.
I don't remember hearing it.
Okay. Ron shook his head. Yes, he's heard it before.
I've just heard the phrase. Yeah.
Okay.
Bind from.
Yeah.
It happened to Samson, didn't it?
Yeah.
Samson was a strong man. They bound him.
Yep. Very true.
Yep.
Well, what did it mean to you before you read the chapter? Assuming you've read the chapter. So what did it mean to you before?
Well, well, in context of the Bible, I would say finding the devil.
Okay.
If I just read it on something else, then I would be limiting somebody who's really powerful in their
Okay.
ability to do things.
Yeah, I would say more to take the power from somebody.
Okay. Okay. For those diehards who have actually read the chapter, what does it mean to you after? Maybe I'll hold that question for later. So, first of all, we're going to go through Mark 7:35 through 35. Sorry, the third chapter, 7th verse through the 35th. And rather than having you folks read it, I'll have you read it later. But this time I'm going to have you listen to it. So use this as your morning meditation, and you can read it on the screen and you can listen to it. So here we go.
Jesus withdrew with his disciples to the lake, and a large crowd from Galilee followed. When they heard about all he was doing, many people came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and the regions across the Jordan and around Tyre and Sidon. Because of the crowd, he told his disciples to have a small boat ready for him to keep the people from crowding him, for he had healed many, so that those with diseases were pushing forward to touch him. Whenever the impure spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." But he gave them strict orders not to tell others about him. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12, that they might be with him and that he might send them out to preach and to have authority to drive out demons. These are the 12 he appointed: Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. To them he gave the name Boanerges, which means sons of thunder, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, Matthew, Thomas, James, son of Alphaeus, Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. Then Jesus entered a house, and again a crowd gathered, so that he and his disciples were not even able to eat. When his family heard about this, they went to take charge of him, for they said, "He is out of his mind." And the teachers of the law who came down from Jerusalem said, "He is possessed by Beelzebul. By the prince of demons he is driving out demons." So Jesus called them over to him and began to speak to them in parables. How can Satan drive out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. If a house is divided against itself, that house cannot stand. And if Satan opposes himself and is divided, he cannot stand. His end has come. In fact, no one can enter a strong man's house without first tying him up. Then he can plunder the strong man's house. Truly I tell you, people can be forgiven all their sins and every slander they utter. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit will never be forgiven. They are guilty of an eternal sin. He said this because they were saying, "He has an impure spirit." Then Jesus' mother and brothers arrived. Standing outside, they sent someone in to call him. A crowd was sitting around him, and they told him, Your mother and brothers are outside looking for you." "Who are my mother and my brothers?" he asked. Then he looked at those seated in a circle around him and said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does God's will is my brother and sister and mother."
Now notice that that's the New International Version. We're going to run through the Common English Bible, which is the one that the authors use. We're going to run through that next. But I wanted to give you a feel for the whole passage before we started dissecting it. So, in the first portion of it, it talks about they came to him from Judea, Jerusalem, Idumea, and the regions across the Jordan and around the Tyre and Sidon. And just in case you're not familiar with New Testament geography, number one up there is, and the green area is Judea. Number 2 star is just below Jerusalem, and to the right of it is Bethlehem. Number 3 is Idumea, which is down at the bottom. And then number 4 identifies the Jordan River and those lands across from it. And number 5 then is generally in the area of Sidon and Tyre. So if they, the people who followed Jesus, came from all those areas, what does that tell you?
They came from all the areas.
Yeah.
And he was well known, or he was gaining a reputation.
Yeah.
No.
He must have been, the news of Jesus must have spread wide enough that it was drawing people from basically all over in parts of Syria and Samaria and Judea, and even across the Jordan, which were non-Jewish areas. So it's also interesting, and I'm going to start with a contradiction of the author. They keep talking about people coming from outside. They take kind of a political view that Jesus addressed the people who were on the fringes, and that he was opposed to those people in the center. Okay, you'll see that kind of contrast throughout the book. There's nowhere here that it says that Jesus did not draw people from all classes and all people. In fact, we have in the New Testament the story of the rich young man and others, tax collectors who have been not part of the fringes. So with that in mind, let's go on and take a look at this one. Now, as we go through, you'll see some portions of the text in bold and inside square brackets up on the screen. Those are from the New International Version. That's what you just heard a recitation of. The rest of it is from the Common English Bible. And I've highlighted that simply so you can see that there is a difference in interpretation. Now, if you look up the Common English Bible, what they tried to do is make it as close to the meaning of the words at the time that Jesus was born, that he lived. Okay, the New International Version tries to modernize it. And they're one and the same in a sense. I mean, much of it, both of them are meant to be for modern audiences, but you'll see a difference in interpretation between the two. So I need a reader.
I will.
Go ahead, Arlene.
Jesus left with his disciples and went to the lake. A large crowd followed him because they had heard what he was doing. They were from Galilee, Judea, Jerusalem, Judea, beyond the Jordan, and the areas surrounding Tyre and Sidon. Jesus told his disciples to get a small boat ready for him so the crowd wouldn't crush him. He had healed so many people that everyone who was sick pushed forward so that they could touch him. Whenever the evil spirits, or impure spirits, saw him. They fell down at his feet and shouted, "You are God's son. You're God's. Yeah, you're God's son." But he strictly ordered them not to reveal who he was. Tell others about him.
Okay. First of all, we've got Nadine and Paul and Julie and Dennis and I assume Sharon online.
Sharon's here.
Sharon's here.
Yeah.
Oh, Sharon's not. Okay. I just want to be sure you folks are hearing okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And you're
Yes.
seeing the screen okay.
Yes.
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 Then that's the most affirmative I've heard in a long time. Is there a difference in your mind between evil spirits and impure spirits?
Well, evil sounds a little more evil. Impure sounds more like lusting after somebody or
Okay.
something
Well, and
of
I
that
was going
nature.
to say maybe just the demons that most of us have within us that cause us distress and
Okay.
not concentrate on what we should be.
Okay.
I don't know how an ancient believer saw those two distinctions, or saw the distinction. As a modern, I'm like, impure, whatever. Evil, that's a different thing altogether. I'm impure. Am I evil? Well, maybe, but I don't think I am. So, but I don't know how the ancient, those in this narrative would have seen it.
Okay. Well, that's interesting because, of course, the impure spirits is more of the New International Version, which is a more trying to talk to people today.
Yeah.
The evil spirits is the
Older.
Common English Bible and reflected more of what the language really meant at that time. So I think we do tend to not like to call things evil because we realize that there are shades of black and white, and there are, in fact, our spirits may be impure, but we hope that they're not evil. And then
We know that there are really evil people.
Yes, that's true. Then the last verse there says, but he strictly ordered them not to reveal who he was, okay, or to tell others about him. Any difference there?
To me, it's basically the same.
Okay. I agree. I think it's pretty similar. So I'm going to throw a number of quotes from the book at you. And this is what the authors say, and I want you to tell me what you say, how you react to that. Followers come now from Idumea and the far south of Palestine to Tyre and Sidon in the far north. They come from the center, Judea and Jerusalem, and from the margins beyond the Jordan. We are next reminded that the crowds are still coming seeking healing. In Mark, the term crowd is synonymous with the disenfranchised masses, the poor, the unemployed, the displaced, the sick, the unclean. Agree? Disagree? Comments?
I don't know how much I can comment because I don't know where he's getting this interpretation. So he's asserting that, but is that exegesis? What's the word for crowds? And is that? And I should know the book of Mark better, but I don't know the authorship as well as the, so it's, I guess that's not how I would see it, but.
Okay. This is Dennis. Well, there's at least two of those that are clear that they are included because he heals the sick and he exorcises the demons. So at least two of those are true for sure.
About the poor.
Yeah.
Okay, he addresses the poor. The question is crowd synonymous with those and only with those?
To me, I thought that he appealed to a wider group, so I would think that the crowd was more inclusive, but maybe Mark didn't.
I would tend to agree. This is my bias. My bias is that I think the author's bias is that almost everything becomes political. It becomes the center or the hierarchy versus the fringes, the rest of the people. And I'm not sure I see Jesus' mission quite that distinctly of us versus them. And again, I point to the crowd did at one point include a rich young man, a tax payer, others, you know. So.
But I do agree that in Mark you see Jesus pushing back against the people who were in power. You know, so when the Pharisees would ask, or whenever even his own disciples would ask, sometimes he would push back at them to say, I'm here for everyone, not just the rich. Because I think that he saw the Jewish people at the time were preaching to themselves.
Well, and yeah, I agree that you see him attacking the status quo.
And I agree with that. I'm just a little uncomfortable with the authors defining the crowd as only those who are the disenfranchised.
Yeah.
So, because I think Jesus spoke to everyone.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I don't know. Yeah, I don't know about that. It's like if it's so hard to see things from different lenses. If you are a student of Karl Marx, you're going to see everything as the proletariat versus the bourgeois. You know, you're going to see it as a dichotomy. But I do think that Jesus was.
I came across the series of shows called The Chosen, and have really been enjoying. I watch it on my bus when I'm waiting for the kids to come out, and it really kind of, puts you a little more in my mind. Kind of shows me what maybe it was like. And the last one that I watched was the end of the second season, and Jesus was just going out to start giving the Sermon on the Mount. And in the crowd that they showed, they had, some Romans came. The one Roman that was, really down his neck was on there because they saw the posters as well that had been put up. And so they came out to see what was going on, and they knew this big crowd was coming. So, it kind of showed richer people and poor people and sick people and all in the crowd. It, really interesting to watch the depiction in video of how things work.
I have a little thought about this, Jonathan. I wonder if they're talking just very specifically in this circumstance of the crowd of people who were pressing in on Jesus, because, in the next scripture, he calls for a boat so that he can kind of get away from them a little bit. And a lot of times when the Pharisees or the scribes are kind of, hanging around listening to him, they're not really presented as part of the crowd. They're sort of off to the side, collecting information that they can use against him. So I don't know that this necessarily, to me, means all crowds in the New Testament. I think it means the people who were specifically at this time coming to see Jesus. They were coming for healing and help. And they probably were more like a tumult or a multitude of people that were, really pushing in on him. That's kind of the way I take this.
Okay. That's a good interpretation also. The very next line in the book says, and Jesus continues to practice exorcism. So I want to talk to you about their focus on exorcism. From the book, it says, liberals who ignore exorcism stories are pre-psychological myth are embarrassed by their centrality in Jesus' ministry, while modern spiritual warfare advocates ignore the public and political character of Jesus' exorcism. I apologize for the fact that I'm reading poorly this morning. In antiquity, exorcism was not uncommon, and still today in traditional cultures, shamans demonstrate the power to cast out evil spirits. Was there anything unique about Jesus' practice of exorcism?
Well, it seems like back then, people who were lepers and people who, had sicknesses, they believed that they had an evil spirit in them. And any act where they healed them could potentially be seen at that time as an exorcism, because they were getting he was getting the unclean spirit out of the person so they could be well, or they could be out of leprosy or something. So I think that, what we see today is not necessarily the way we would have thought back then about exorcism.
Okay. Any other comments?
I'm curious about how exorcisms were performed in those times. I only know it, what was recorded in the Gospels and what I guess Catholic priests or Pentecostals do today, but I don't know how they, shamans, I guess, have their rituals. But it strikes me as Jesus had this authority that was kind of unparalleled. He commanded them to come out. He didn't say, God, I want you to. He just said, by my own authority. It was kind of like, but yeah, I do think that's, yeah, I'm not sure. Was there anything unique about his practice? Like I said, I'd have to compare it.
Okay. I'm not an expert on testamentary materials, but from some of the reading I've read, it indicates that between the Old and New Testament there were some writings, like the book of Tobias.
Mm-hmm.
Tobit, which talked about Tobias, and there was a exorcism there, and there's also one in the Qumran Society, and the basic issues. You ask how it was happening. Some of the authors I've read indicate that these books written between the Old and New Testament give us some kind of a clue on how the first century Christians would have viewed exorcisms. And so the book of Tobit, the Qumran, and some of the writings of Josephus indicate these kinds of things. First of all, that there was often an herb, something had to be burnt, something often it was a part of a heart or the liver of an animal. So that aroma somehow helped chase out evil spirits. The second item was it had to be done with authority. And often the authority pre-Jesus was Solomon. They would point to Solomon and some of the stories of him casting out demons, exorcising demons, using a symbol and a ring. Okay. And that it was always combined with a prayer. I mean, there were they would have to stand and offer some kind of a ritual prayer before. So those are the elements that seem to be part of exorcism between the Old and New Testament. Does that make sense? So that's all I have been able to find out as far as what an exorcism entailed in that point in time.
Well, I kind of agree with Ryan. He seemed to do it with more authority. He had an authority about him.
Yeah.
Or it doesn't sound like he had to burn livers.
Yeah.
Right.
When I think of the shamans, I think of them, more the African countries. If they wore, certain masks, or they, did chants and stuff like that and danced around, chasing the spirit away.
Well, and some of them use incense and both. And I think in some of the indigenous cultures here, the Navajos, or they use like sand paintings, and you would sit in the center of the sand painting, and then you would have so yeah, I'm not sure how all that.
I would say most of the indigenous would use sage, burning of sage and stuff.
Yeah, or
It's
and a
supposed to
chant.
draw
Usually there was a
people.
chant which would be equivalent to the biblical prayer
Yes,
offered.
chants.
Yeah. Okay, so Amanda Whitmer has written an article, and from that I extracted a little bit here. Why was Jesus accused of being possessed by Beelzebub and of madness? Across cultures, healers and exorcists are often seen as a threat to the social order. And I think this is part of what the authors are trying to say, even though this source is outside of our book. Accusing someone of witchcraft or demonic spirit possession is a way of discrediting them, and thereby rendering them less of a threat. The claim that someone was possessed by a demon was particularly common in the ancient world, and it was easy to make and difficult to disprove.
Mm-hmm.
In a society such as the first century Jewish Palestine, there were many reasons why Jesus might have been seen as a threat. The most obvious one was related to the precarious position the Jewish people found themselves in under Roman and imperial rule. The Jewish leaders in particular did not wish to provoke Rome and bring trouble down upon themselves and their people. As a result, they worked to protect a delicate balance between keeping Rome at bay and maintaining their own social and religious boundaries. When a society feels vulnerable at its margins, it will tend to have less tolerance for those who challenge those boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
So I think the authors are basically saying this is the reason why the scribes would have attacked Jesus and accused him of being a demon, because it's hard to disprove, easy to accuse. It doesn't address the issue why the gospel writers would include the exorcisms in there.
How many
Yes.
times in the last few years have you heard that it's just a witch hunt that discredits it?
Yep.
Just think of the witchcraft trials in early America. Proving you weren't a witch was difficult. I don't think they were successful. Most of them died.
Yes, the witches died. The ones that weren't were taken care of.
It's hard to disprove something that's unfalsifiable.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, if you deny it, or if you confess it, then the label sticks. And if you deny it, that proves, because only somebody who's guilty would deny it. It's like, oh, you're caught in a trap.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was interesting to take a look at 4 dramatic exorcisms in the New Testament. And the first one comes from Mark, and we've read it in a previous class session. And immediately there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. Now that's in Mark. In Matthew, and Jesus answered, "O faithless and perverse generation, how long am I to be with you? How long am I to bear with you? Bring him here to me." And Jesus rebuked him, and the demon came out of him, and the boy was cured instantly. So that's obviously the exorcism of a small boy. So there's Matthew and Mark. Here's Luke. And demons also came out of many, crying, "You are the Son of God." But he rebuked them and would not allow them to speak because they knew that he was the Christ. So the next one should be John, right? There are no exorcisms in John. So we go back to Matthew, to Mark rather. For he said to him, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. And Jesus asked him, what is your name? He replied, my name is Legion, for we are many. And he begged him eagerly not to send them out of the country. Now a great herd of swine was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, send us to the swine, let us enter them. So he gave them leave, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the swine, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. Now, I'm not sure if I'm a demon.
Do you remember that story?
I'm not sure
It's not in our
that is a
Sunday
better
school
option
Yeah.
than just having to go out of the country. But
I hope they were wild swine and didn't belong to some
No,
farmer.
They were
they
lame.
were
Lost
because
his whole herd.
that's why he was told to leave, I think.
Well, they were unclean animals to the Jewish
Yeah.
people.
yes,
Yeah, so
yeah,
it
that's
didn't
true.
matter.
That's true. So there wouldn't have been a Jew as a swine herder. So unless they were really on the fringes.
Belonged to the Romans.
I always wonder why the unclean spirits could see him so clearly. You know, I mean, that's in a lot of those scriptures. They saw him, he rebuked them, and then they left the body that they were in. So how come evil people could see him better? I always have that question. That stuff.
Well, it's at night,
Mhm.
what do you see best? More darkness or a flashlight?
Flashlight.
Well,
Mhm.
so the evil spirits are seeing
I like
the purity
Light
of
in their
Christ,
darkness.
of Jesus.
Mhm.
That's interesting. Okay,
You buy that?
I do actually. I like that explanation.
I came up with it just like
That
that.
Good job.
Some days I think.
He was the flashlight.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, the authors say, at issue in Jesus' confrontation with unclean spirits then is who has the power to frame reality. Okay, according to Mark, exorcism is first and foremost the practice of unmasking the truth of a situation. As such, exorcism is fundamental to any movement of liberation, personal or political. Comments? Agree, disagree?
Let's see.
It's an interesting thought.
That is. I think that's an element, for sure.
Mhm.
I don't think that covers all of it, but I think that's an element.
Okay.
You know, just as, and I think the author mentions this, just as the God of the book of Exodus, Moses confronts God, and he doesn't give when he reveals his name, says, "I am. I am. I get to define myself." So.
I think it's also interesting that reminds me of another thought they had in the book. They talk about God saying, "I am that I am." I mean, he doesn't give Moses a name, and Jesus tells them, the demons, not to name him. And it reminds me of I don't know what culture it is. I don't know if it's Native American or what, but they believe there's power in the name, and somebody knowing your name, taking your name, using your name, which may also tie in with why the Old Testament tells us not to take the Lord's name in vain.
That's one of the reasons that some authors or some scholars have given as to why God would not tell Moses his name. He just said, "I am."
Yep.
Was to kind of show the hierarchy that, God was superior to Moses.
Yeah.
And didn't have to give up his name.
Yep. Good point.
And these authors are talking about that's why Jesus called himself the human one, which I think is an interesting interpretation that only the Common English Bible has. I as we kind of look that up, but I always wondered why the Son of Man
Mhm.
is all through. You know, Jesus calls himself the Son of Man. And so he is rejecting those titles, just like what we're talking about. So that's why he's calling himself the Son of Man, which might mean the human one. I never thought of it that way before.
There's a blog posting for the Bible Gateway where they talk about after they added in the CEB, the Common English Bible, that they got a lot of criticism because of, the first thing people ran across was it wasn't the Son of Man, it was the human one.
Yeah.
And their point was that if you take a look back at the original, to be honest, it probably is a Greek. I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it's Greek or Hebrew, but if you look back at originally, the real language is one that appears as human. And that's why CEB, that version of the Bible, says the human one, as opposed to the Son of Man. Now, I have a bone to pick with all these folks, because if you think about it, I'm a son of man, and we also attribute the term Son of God to Jesus. Well, who among us is not a son of God or a daughter of God? I don't want to be sexist, but are we not all sons and daughters of God? In fact, aren't some of the scriptures even say that? So it's interesting that the honorific, the title given to Jesus, is one that really applies to all people. Am I missing something? Or do you disagree with me?
I don't know. I've heard some Calvinists say that we are adopted as sons of God, that we are sons of Satan first, and then through baptism we are grafted on. That's one interpretation.
Yeah.
Well, and Islam doesn't believe that we are children of God, because I don't understand it completely. I'm just starting to read. Okay, so we're doing the Islam segment of my class, and I went to a mosque Friday where they didn't really talk about that, but basically Muslims do not believe we are children of God. I don't understand it.
Yeah.
I haven't figured that out yet
Yeah.
exactly. We are created by God, but that doesn't make us God's children. Which I always thought that if we were created by God, then we kind of belong to God as at least metaphoric children.
Yeah. Well, I guess we could carry that a long way, because we talk about Jesus being the only begotten Son of God, and yet who begot the rest of us? So
I know.
So I think it simply shows that there's a lack in our language to fully explain everything.
I have also always loved the debate that we have in the Christian faith on whether Jesus was both fully human and fully divine. And sometimes that's really hard to grasp in our human minds, but I do like the parts in the Bible that Jesus is showing his humanity, and perhaps the Son of Man is talking about what he has in common with people.
Yeah.
I agree with that, Jane. That was my thought exactly. That Jesus is trying to establish his connection to the rest of humanity. And, in the book of John later on, he says, the things you've seen me do, you're going to do greater things because I'm leaving now.
Yeah, I've always felt as if Jesus is wholly God and not also wholly human, then where is the example set? He has an advantage. Well, but I want to go back just for a second here. The authors say exorcism is first and foremost the practice of unmasking the truth of a situation. Accept, reject, comments?
We use the phrase nowadays, we're exorcising our own demons, and that's that's kind of our own personal work on what separates us from God. So I don't think we're real comfortable with the word exorcism anymore, but that is what we mean, is looking at ourselves very clearly.
And in a sense, that is unmasking the truth of our own personal situation.
Yeah, so I can accept that.
I was going to say, if you don't know what the problem is, then how do you correct it or fix it or cure it?
Yeah. Okay. Well, then let's move on to Mark 3rd chapter 13 to 19. And again, what's in the square brackets is the New International Version, and the rest of it is the CEB, or Common English Bible. Jesus went up on a mountainside, and called those he wanted, and they came to him. He appointed 12 and called them apostles. He appointed them to be with him, to be sent out to preach, and to have authority to drive out demons. He appointed 12, and then they proceed to list them all. But the one thing I want to clarify here is that the New International Version, NIV, does not say called them apostles. It simply says he appointed 12. Is that an important enough difference?
Did other versions use the word apostles other than CEB?
My version says ordained.
Does it say apostle?
And ordained 12.
Are you in the inspired version?
I'm in giant print.
That's a good book.
King James Version.
King James Version, okay, there you go.
Now this one just says,
But it doesn't say called them apostles.
Right, this says ordained 12.
Okay.
The NRSV has apostles in it.
Okay.
This one says these are the 12 he appointed.
Okay.
Isn't that interesting? I didn't know there was
Well,
a
name
difference.
of God says, called those whom he wanted. They came to him. There it says, and whom he called apostles.
Okay. So there's a definite difference there.
Yeah.
So.
It seems to me that one thing in the modern age, apostles has a religious meaning, which I'm wondering if back then, as I understand apostles, it kind of means someone who is sent out. But now we think of it as an office, like in our church, an office in the church. Is that what Jesus meant?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting that the NIV eliminates that reference to apostles, so that which would be a more modern. And maybe it is for that very reason that there's a concern that it would identify a specific church hierarchy.
Yeah. Well, either way, they're set apart, and they're given authority. They're given authority to heal, to preach, cast out demons.
Right.
Well, I think, didn't the Apostle Paul kind of redefine the meaning of apostle, because he's the one who sort of took it to mean somebody who was a witness, an actual eye-to-eye physical witness of Jesus, and he claimed that for himself because of his experience on the road to Damascus.
Yes.
And, in modern day, since we have 12 apostles in our church, we kind of mean that figuratively, not literally, witnesses of Christ. But I've heard many times it said that the Council of 12 are, sort of the leading missionary arm of the church, the witnesses of Jesus.
Yeah.
Well, if you remember from the St. Peter versus St. Paul book, that was the charge they had against Paul. Was the 12 said he wasn't around when Jesus was here on earth. He didn't know him personally. So they accused him of not actually having a personal acquaintance with Jesus. Of course, Paul said he had a vision, but anyway.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, for Paul, that vision, seeing him in the Spirit, qualified him as an apostle. For Peter, it didn't. So it's a matter of whether you're Republican or Democrat, I guess, or some similarity kind of thing. The other change in here is, and probably not a lot of differences, but it's interesting that sometimes the word is, he had authority to throw out demons, and the other one is to drive out demons. I'm not sure which I prefer. I think I'd rather be driven out than thrown out.
I'd rather not be a demon.
Yeah, that's a better option. Okay, the authors say Jesus' naming of the 12 is also an unmistakable allusion to the 12 tribes, and they give the references, but Christians have wrongly correlated this to a supersessionist theology, as if the apostolic church somehow was replacing Israel. Quite the contrary, this action intends a renewal of the original form of Israelite self-government, the tribal confederacy. Now, there's a lot packed into that one. So first of all, you understand what supersessionist theology is.
Yes, it's where Christians claim that Jesus rejected the Jews and that the Christians are now the chosen.
Yes. Okay. And so the Christians are replacing ancient Israel. But the other interesting thing here is it's a renewal of the original form of Israelite self-government, the tribal confederacy. What was the tribal confederacy?
The 12 tribes.
Okay, 12 tribes. And who led the 12 tribes?
There was a leader from each house.
Okay.
That was, I don't know exactly.
Is that the priest from each house?
No, it was, I wanted to say it was just like the patriarch of that group, I guess. Because you had the Levites, which were the priests.
Oh, yeah.
But I never associated the 12 apostles with the 12 tribes. I found that interesting.
Okay.
I never thought of that.
Well, the author is also making a point that somehow this tribal confederacy is superior to other forms of government. Let's go on for a second.
Doesn't it remind you of our church then? I mean, I wonder if they've heard of us. We kind of have a tribal confederacy now, if you want to use that term.
Yep. Well, yeah, go ahead.
We say theocratic democracy.
Yes. Well,
I think here the authors were trying to say a decentralized leadership where the 12 leaders of the different tribes would maybe, be in touch with each other, but they'd each take care of their own local area.
Okay. So the authors are advocating a decentralized government where each state is a tribe and rules itself. Let me read a little further. The book of Joshua narrates how the Israelite tribes governed themselves in the promised land as a kind of decentralized confederacy, united under a covenant with God. Each tribe administers its own local affairs under the leadership of local political military judges. There's your answer about who rules. Hebrew Bible scholar Norman Gottwald in the Hebrew Bible, etc., contends that Israel's intertribal, essentially equalitarian social organization represents a revolutionary alternative to the dominating centralized rule of Canaanite city-states. Okay. So how does that apply today?
Well, if you read the Federalist Papers, it's a debate today.
Okay.
It was a debate when they created our Constitution, states' rights versus nationalism, that will continue until the end of time. It's just in my mind, there's got to be a balance between the two.
And I would say we're unbalanced right now.
Yeah.
In which direction?
That the powerful are ruling over those without.
It's kind of like a seesaw, and the rich people have got the upper hand.
Yeah.
So you're talking about an oligarchy.
Not necessarily.
Well, you said the rich people have all the power.
No, I said they have the upper hand.
Oh, okay.
that they tend to rule, but it's not absolute.
Well, I think it's interesting that they talk about a decentralized confederacy because of our history, North and South Confederacy versus the Union.
Yeah.
But I think they mean that with a small c. Just a group of people who band together. So.
Yeah, don't link the Confederate States of America with this Confederacy. Totally
Right.
opposite.
Okay. Okay. Well, moving along. When the discussion gets difficult, we just move right along.
Yeah.
First Samuel describes how the Confederacy finally succumbed to the more conventional mode of a model of a monarchy under David, and then to a fully centralized temple state under Solomon. Does that make sense to you? Okay.
Well, Samuel, he warned the people. They wanted a king, and he said, "Well, you know what's going to happen."
Okay. So does that mean that some modern day prophet needs to raise up and say, warn us against having a president?
No, there's a difference between a president and a king.
Okay.
I think the problem is the people who influence the president. Maybe.
Once again, looking at the Constitution, this is the reason why we have the separation of church and state.
Yeah.
This was the reason why our founders said, we don't want a king anymore because kings are not gods. And they refused, and John Adams actually wanted to call George Washington king. But they said, no, we're not going to set up that kind of system here. So I think that's also a debate.
Okay. In the book Anarchy and Christianity, the biblical chronicler portrays powerful kings as idolatrous and unjust, and weak kings as good. So maybe we need a weak king.
I don't know.
Weak kings as good.
Weak.
Interesting. Humble. Maybe the word humble.
Strong. So I would say strong morals, strong and courageous, but weak as in, well, sharing of power would be nice.
Okay.
I would just cite, kind of the lessons of history and not necessarily what I believe is the right thing, but, these little states that were kind of loosely attached in the time of the judges, it was tough for them to wage war. You can't exert your influence in a world where battles and war are what decides the fate of nations, unless you have a powerful king who can raise an army. And I think that was part of what David provided. He was brave. He'd beaten Goliath, and he was a leader. You can say God is your king, but if you don't have an army, you're not going to do well in the world. That's just kind of the way it is.
So in that case, who's the strong man? The guy with the armies?
Guy with the armies.
The armies is always the winner. But that's what Dennis said earlier. That's why Samuel was kind of warning them. Be careful what you wish for. You get a strong government, a strong king, and then that you'll find people who will take advantage of that. Power against power.
I mean, look in the world today at who spends the biggest part of their national budget on military. It's us.
Yeah. And we're a powerful nation.
And Israel, under that confederacy, and even after it became under a king, was still a fairly weak country, and therefore was overrun many times. The real shame is that right isn't might. That it takes guns and battle and warriors to preserve even the good parts of civilization. Jesus' appointment of 12 disciples here recalls Joshua's naming leaders on the eve of Israel's dramatic crossing into the Promised Land. It would seem, therefore, to represent a specific argument for retribalization. What does that mean? And are the authors looking back to a time in history that no longer exists? I wonder if the authors are looking back at a time period in history that no longer exists.
Oh. Well, to me, retribalization would mean it was more equal, and so you would be able to, everybody would have at least some care from maybe less marginalization, but how would it work in today's world?
Yeah, that's the concern I have, and is how, if we go back to a tribal organization ruled by judges, how do we apply that in a world today? I think on a church level, we can do that. And in a sense, we have. Our tribe is the congregation. And it's ruled over by friendly judges or lawyers, either one.
You can kind of see a little bit of that in some of the places where you have large concentrations of certain groups of people, like maybe a German community or a Chinese community where you've got Chinatown and you've got another area that's, and you can see it in different parts of areas where, like gangs take over and they come in and they have set up their rules and you get into their area and you may not get out. It's
Yeah, and
that is something that is still around today.
Say we talk about tribal politics, which is not a good thing.
Yeah.
Well, I have a friend that we talk about tribalism quite a bit because he's gay, for one thing, and so he's always talking about he never fits into any tribe, and he always kind of makes me think, like, okay, I am a part of the tribe of Community of Christ. I am part of the tribe of Chiefs fan. We have tribal, Democrats versus Republicans. We have tribes everywhere in our culture. And so I think there is a danger in tribalism because it does end up leaving people. He doesn't have a tribe. It's very, very small.
But when I think about the 12 tribes of Israel, I think, okay, so you've got one tribe, and hopefully they're taking better care of their people than if you have a king over the whole nation.
But the tribes are at war with each other.
Yes, and that's a bad thing.
Yeah.
The tribes must have still had some meaning, though, in Jesus' time, because in the 22nd chapter of Luke, Jesus promises the 12 that they will be the judges over the 12 tribes. And I always didn't understand that very much, because then I wondered, well, who's going to judge everybody else who was not one of the 12 tribes?
And is that why it was important in, I don't know what I'm looking at Eloise. I don't know what Eloise's patriarchal blessing says, but my grandmother's named her tribe. And so she used to tell us, you're part of this tribe. But I didn't get that in my patriarchal blessing.
Yeah. I got it in mine.
I did get it in mine, and I was wondering, but how can we all be part of the tribe? Because there were other people outside of the 12 tribes that were in existence then. So could we all be part of a tribe of the 12 tribes? I just thought of that recently.
Yeah, I don't know.
No, it doesn't work genetically at all.
Oh, you're talking about anthropology now, or?
It doesn't work.
Like
I think that goes back to Joseph and what he thought back then.
Joseph Smith in his point of tribes,
Do you all remember way back when Doris Elling was told
She was part of the tribe of Manasseh.
Okay.
The only person we've ever known anywhere that was told that.
That is one of the 12, though.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a half tribe.
Okay.
Now,
So to me, I think we use the term tribe because we go back to the 12 tribes. But I think their definition was the family unit. These are your family. And, watch out for each other. And it's not meant to power play each other. It's just to, take care of one another. And I think when we're talking about like who is a strong person, I think today we're talking about these. I mean, it's not necessarily governments. It's just the free market. I'm trying to think of the term for it. But who's making all the money? It's the people who are doing things to conglomerate and make the money. And that's kind of, I think, where these authors were trying to go, is to say, are we going to hide these strong men, that's what the term was, and allow those who are in need to be taken care of. So I guess at processing through the chapter, that's kind of where I came to a conclusion, that our families units need to take care of each other. And like Jane said, sometimes we have people who are disenfranchised, so they probably need to be adopted by one of those families or tribes.
Well, we are way out of time, so Nadine's got the last word. And
Yay!
we are not done with this chapter. So since I'm teaching next week, I'm taking the prerogative to continue the same chapter for next week.
what page are you talking about?
It's chapter 4, and you find where it talks about the homily for Jesus about revolution. That's what we're going to start talking about.
Okay, well, we just stay on chapter 4. We
Yes,
won't go on.
yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think there's enough left for us to handle one more Sunday.